Hello, welcome to Sterling Armory's Oakeshott Typology series. This is episode, I believe it's 17, and I think it's the third episode on Pommels. Last episode we covered all the wheel type Pommels, and now we're moving on to some of the more weird style Pommels that I really like. If you're new to the channel, if you're new to the series here, our channel is Sterling Armory. We're a bunch of nerds who like to drink a lot of drink, talk about swords. We have a podcast called Sword Talk Podcasts on the same YouTube channel. And if you're catching this is the Oakeshott Typology series where we've been kind of discussing and following the Oakeshott Typology and going through all the blade types. We did the guard types, and now we're on to Pommels. And we're about a little over halfway through the Pommels. And so, yeah, now we're getting into the fun ones, I think. So, our sources for our videos are directly from the Oakeshott books. So for the guards and pommels, most of it is from Swords in the Age of Chivalry. And the Records of the Medieval Sword is also their secondary book. And I thought I read that my Armoury webpage is mostly back up. And hopefully it's still up if you're able to go over there and support those guys. We don't know them. We don't really. There's no benefit for us for them, but other than that, the content they provide, and they sum up these books really well in a couple articles that are very easy to follow. So we definitely highly recommend going over there if you do not have one of these books. And again, support those guys if you can. So let's dive right into it. Let me pull up. So where we're at in the Pommels typology here is so. There's really two large groups of pommels that exist on all of Oakeshott's Group 1 type blades. Group 1 meaning blades that were all mostly prevalent before 1350. Am I saying that right? Yeah, I think it's 1350. Is that right? Yeah, 1350. So you're talking about type 13s to type 10s to type 14 blades. So cut-centric blades, except for the type 14. And from the Viking time period on up to the middle of the medieval time period. And the two basic types of pommels that you've seen there are wheel type pommels or the more oblong brazelnut type pommels. But now we're diving into some weird ones. So in the types of pommels, we are all the way up to type L. So let me go ahead and pull up some things here. And and where we're at in the chapter is Oakeshott's basically saying, like, of all the wheel pommels and brazelnut pommels we've studied, if you were to grab 10 swords from that time period, 9 out of 10 swords would have one of those pommels. However, the ones we're covering today are that 1 out of 9. So they're the oddballs, the ones that are some we don't have any actual surviving evidence of, but they are in either artwork or they're carved in carvings, or they exist somewhere other than excavated archaeological evidence. So let's go ahead and start. So, that was a mouthful. All right. If I can get my right mouse here. I have two computers here, and I was just using the mouse on the wrong computer. So, okay. Let me arrange that. There we go. No, actually, let's go back. So, first one. And again, so when we go through the descriptions, I'll pretty much summarize what's right out of the book. These, again, are what I like. They're the oddball pommels, ones you don't really see, and that are not that common. And they're also not common in the modern historical recreation realm either. So these are fun. The first one there is type L. So if you go back to the brazelnut pommels way back, this is kind of and I'm not sure why he kind of pulls this out as its own, other than the fact that it is a lot longer in terms of, if you're looking at the screen there, in terms of the vertical dimension. But the original type that's similar to that, I'm trying to go back and pull up the type here. If this takes too long, I'll stop. So the type C was a flattened version of this, and then type D, and then even E and F, they kind of flatten out a little bit similar to that. And then the type L is, I would think it'd be a version right after that, but he kind of pulls it out separately. And so what he says about it is it's a tall, angular trifoil, And the only example that he knows of is in a Spanish, what you call it? I don't recall. Actually, I'm not sure if he's talking about a specific piece or if he's talking about a piece of art. And I know it's specified elsewhere, and I'm trying to remember what it was. But so basically, what he's saying is it's very rare from 1220 to 1250-ish, and they're usually all Spanish. So he thinks this might be like a type from the older typology of Pommels that's just very Spanish-oriented. So that's the type L. Again, you'll find that on type 13 blades. I think he says there was one on a type 12 blade as well. And then, so the next type there, that might look familiar. You might think, wait a minute, type M, that's not uncommon. That's a pretty common Viking pommel. But this particular one is not the two-piece typical Viking pommel. This is kind of a version that comes after that. Hopefully I wasn't blocking the mic with my book the whole time there. So the type M now is the next one. And he's saying other than the older styles that predate this one, this solid piece version seems to be a British only type pommel. And there's just a few that date between 1250 and 1350, and they're in Scotland. And they're usually almost always found on monuments, not on historical finds. So there are a few historical finds, but it's more prevalent in artwork and in statues than it is in historical finds. So yeah, that's type L and type M. And I believe both of those, again, are either on type 12 or type 13 blades. Type M there is also obviously on type 10 blades as well. So let's go to the next one. I keep using the wrong mouse again. Alrighty, so next one. So type N. So again, going back to the brazen nut, N and O, I think, are just a continuation of different types of brazen nuts, in my opinion. And in fact, I used to call the brazen nut when I was a kid. I mentioned this in the last two videos. I used to call the brazen nut pommel a boat because that's what I thought it was. So type N is even more like a boat. So let's see what he says about type N here. So the pommel shaped like a boat. So now even Oakeshott's calling this one a boat. Examples are rare. There's one in Zurich on a type 13 blade. And there's one in a private collection that's also a type 13 blade. And that's really all he says about it. There's one on a type 14 blade as well. I think he has images of those in the Records of the Medieval Sword book. So yeah, I think it's just another version of a brazen nut. I'm not sure why it's pulled out on its own type, other than it's just a slightly different shaped brazen nut, more like a boat. And then type O is, again, even a more exaggerated version of type N. And what he says about this, another rare type, but nearly every example is a sculpted figure of a military con in the Cathedral of Freiburg. So St. George, St. Sebastian, St. Peter, they all have this pommel. And as far as I'm aware, that's the majority of findings of this pommel is in that area. So that's pretty neat. So where did it come from? Why were all those cathedral sculptures done that way? Don't know. But it's pretty neat. So the next one, let's jump over. So again, two exaggerated brazen nuts is what I would call them. So that's N and O. So the next one, going over to type P and Q. So type P is the first one. So type P, I always thought that was a more common type, but according to Oakeshott, there was only one example of this. And it's in a German museum that I cannot pronounce, so I'm not even going to try to butcher that name. So I always thought type P was more of a fishtail, or that could fall into the family of fishtail. But due to the fact that how thick it is, and now it's not really a fishtail, right? It's more cylindrical than a fishtail would be, flattened. So yeah, it's a very unique, very different pommel. So type Q now is... So I would consider Q a subtype of one of the wheel pommels, right? But he's pulling it out on its own, and he's saying that type Q is its own type and not a part of the wheel pommel. So for Q, he's saying there's several examples in manuscripts and paintings. but none surviving examples. So they generally, in manuscripts, they appear on Type 14 blades. And I believe Deltin makes a Type 14 that has an image, or has that flower type pommel, but I don't think it has as many lobes. And then Albion also makes a blade, although I don't remember which one it is, that has a similar flower-shaped pommel. And that's actually on my list of one to make, because I've always wanted to make one of those. So those are Type P and Q. The interesting thing about Q, what I thought was interesting, is his side-on view. He has that as flat. And I'm going back to the manuscripts and paintings that I've seen of that, and I don't remember them being flat. I thought they actually flared out in the middle, more like a wheel pommel. But I'll have to go back and check that. That's what I'm going off memory with. So, okay, on to the next ones. So, R and S. So, R is a fun one. So, I think a lot of folks, including myself, thought R was a very, very common pommel type in medieval swords. But evidently, it is actually not common at all. Let's see what Oakeshott here says. So the spherical pommel, survivors being more rare than one might expect, and such obvious practical form of a pommel. So there's 2 in the London Museum, which I remember seeing. But the ones in the the ones in the London Museum have a more Viking-style blade to them, which you wouldn't picture that to be in the Viking time period, right? That seems too early for that, but he's saying that's what they were. And they weren't replacement pommels either, which is interesting. And then the other ones he saw were the 9th, 10th century swords of the Frankish origin. So there's a couple there that have spherical pommels that are Type 16 blades. So I have seen a couple Type 16 blades. And then I always say this wrong. There goes my phone. So in the Masejowski Bible, there's some drawings of a couple of those types of swords, including the one Goliath uses, which is cool. But yeah, other than that, there's not many examples of spherical pommels, but in modern recreations, they're all over the place because they're easy to make. So I've actually never made a spherical pommel myself, mainly because everybody else does it. At least not, I can't say everybody. When I was growing up and the swords that I used, a lot of them had spherical pommels, and I just wanted to make something different. There are a couple really good. There's actually a really nice piece. One of Albion's museum lines that has a spherical pommel to it, and I believe that's from the Royal Armories, but I could be wrong. The original piece on that, I could be wrong on that. So the spherical pommel, that's that. So then Type S. So Type S, I've never quite understood why this would be a thing. I always looked at that and just, man, that seems very uncomfortable, but it is somewhat prevalent. So what Oakeshott says for Type 10 is the cube and corners with bevels cut off is less rare than the prior, so it's less rare than the globe pommel or the spherical pommel. It's less rare than all the previous types that I've talked about today. So it's more common than everything else we talked about today, which I wouldn't think, but it is what it is. So there are survivors of it. Sorry, I'm pausing here as I'm trying to catch my place. There are surviving examples that exist. They're less frequently shown in art, though. So basically, with the Type S, we actually have more surviving examples than you see in art. So normally it's the other way around. Normally we see a lot more artwork depictions, and then we have a select amount of actual findings. This one's the other way around. This one we have a lot of findings, but not as much in art. So, which is interesting. And they're usually on Type 13 blades, either Type 13As or Type 13Bs, if you followed the earlier blade discussion. So they're usually associated with those types of blades. So that is the Type S. Again, I've never made one. I don't want to make one, at least not yet. Who knows, my taste might change, but I always thought that was an odd shaped pommel, and I have seen a number of those in person. So the last one we're going to cover, we're actually going to jump ahead a bit. So we're going to skip the T pommels and all the variations of the T pommels. We're going to skip all the way over to W, because W he adds back in later on the second revision of this, and he adds a W here, and I'm not quite sure why. Again, this is kept separate. But so this is a W type pommel, and he lumps it in with this group that I'm talking about today. And I'm not sure why why he doesn't call it a different version of a wheel pommel, because essentially it's a wheel pommel that's kind of squished. So it's not fully round, it's kind of squished. If you're familiar with the Windlass collection from the Royal Armories just came out with one of their arming swords from the Royal Armories that has one of these, and I believe Albion's museum line also does one of these as well. But he's saying this form of pommel is difficult to describe. It may be likened to a squashed up variety of one of the discoined. Is that how he's saying it? Pommels, basically the wheel pommel that would have a coin inset. Or it might be likened to a certain form of seed pod, which I guess they call it pod shaped, which I can see. But yeah, so that's a wheel pommel. It's essentially just a slightly different version of a wheel pommel. He has a lot of writing about it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it is an interesting nonetheless. So that was added in the second printing of this book, and that is where we're going to leave off today. So a lot of different weird pommel shapes, and that kind of finishes out the Group 1 pommels in terms of the oddballs. So next time we talk about pommels, we're going to go into the T types and all the scent stopper types, which are now moving into the Group 2 pommels and the oddballs in the Group 2. So yeah, that is that for... Oh, keep using the wrong mouse again. So hopefully you're liking these series of Oakeshott Typology videos. We're almost done. I think we only have maybe one more video on pommels, maybe. It might be two. And then from the videos of that, we're going to go into the different hilt group types, which I think are pretty cool. And looking at the hilt group types, it's a really good way to know if a sword design kind of falls within historical... let me rephrase that. If a modern sword design kind of falls within historical parameters, it's a really good quick check. It's not all or nothing, but it's a good quick check. So we're going to cover that as well. And yeah, that's it. We're still working with a new camera setup here. So if I'm all look confused, that's why, because I still haven't got used to this. So, but thanks for joining us, and we will catch you guys next time, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next Sword Talk podcast as well. Righty, thank you.